Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everybody for coming to our industry forum on business analytics today. Hopefully this forum kind of gives you all a good overview about how business analytics are utilized by different companies, and hopefully some insights also into various different career paths that you can pursue kind of in business analytics. Before we dive into it, just a couple housekeeping items. Please keep yourselves on mute until we get to kind of the open Q&A portion, and then feel free to unmute yourselves if you have a question, or you can start dropping questions into the chat, and one of the Alberts Placement Center staff can ask it for you on your behalf. Really, whatever works best for you. We'll try to wrap up around 1:25. And in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we have a few students who are going to ask some preset questions of our panelists, and they're members of the Albers Grad Student Advisory Board and also the Undergrad Council. And for anybody that's not familiar with these two groups, they work with Albers Placement Center, and they help us with events, giving feedback on events, and also kind of helping steer what we do as far as professional development topics and events go. So they're really instrumental in kind of helping us plan these types of workshops for you all. So that being said, let's get into the panel and have them do some introductions. Why don't we start with Pooja? Why don't you go first? Maybe just tell us a little bit about your background, where you work, and what you're currently doing.
Thank you, Justine, and hello, everyone. I'm Pooja Sant. I am first thankful to Seattle U for inviting me to this panel, and I am just diehard fan of data analytics, and I would start with my brand. So my brand is 3P. First P is for passion for data, finance, technology, engineering, and second P is for power to fix things, to create clarity, to generate energy, and to deliver success. And third P is for people, how I have led people and teams to be successful. So with this in mind, I came to US from India 15 years ago, and since then I have been working at Microsoft. Currently, the role that I'm doing is the director in engineering finance team. Prior to this role, I was the director of data analytics and technology in Microsoft Audit Finance Group, and we led the technology innovation that were happening in the industry, and we applied it to Microsoft Finance. So I would just say that whoever is listening to this panel today, we want to let you know that your destiny is in your hands. You just need to focus on your career, drive your career car, and take it wherever you want to take it. Just make sure you network with people, bond with people, and just have mentor and sponsors. Thank you, Justin.
Oh, thanks. Jason.
Thank you. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me here as well. Jason Gowans, originally from Scotland. I'm the SVP of Data Science and Analytics with Nordstrom. Been with the company for 8 years. Spent a lot of those years building a lot of the personalization technologies that we use, so things like product recommenders, etc. These days, I support analytics and data science for the whole company, so that's across digital, merchandising, marketing, and supply chain are some of those areas.
Great, thanks. How about Steve?
Right. No, great. Thanks Justin for inviting me here today, and happy to be in the panel to answer any questions. So Steve Beach, depends on what list you're looking at. I'm from Amazon. I lied a little bit. It says I'm senior manager of supply chain optimization. I actually moved into Amazon Logistics, the delivery company. And so now I do analytics there. So I was too lazy to actually reply back and correct Justin's agenda. But so my career has been at Amazon for the last like 12 years in business analytics. I'll try not to go into the boring details of my entire career path, but I started as a software developer and kind of just landed in analytics based off of my own career path. It wasn't actually a choice; it just kind of happened, and I'm really glad it happened. And it really all came to because I became like a master of SQL at my old company, and it just kind of diverted me into this business analytics path that I really, really enjoyed. So where I ended up being at Amazon is building analytics teams, really transforming how we could find and use data to monitor, metricize the business, and then drive improvements. And that's where a lot of value from business analytics comes from. And then now I'm running software team, a data engineering team, and BI teams in order to build products that help create data and analytics so we can actually improve the logistics company. And I'm happy to answer more questions later on if anyone has any.
Cool, thanks, Steve. And last but certainly not least, Chris.
Hey folks, Chris Hayden here. I too am happy to be here. I'm the Director of Data Science at Zillow, or Zillow Group technically. I got out of undergrad in the middle of the 2007 financial crisis with degrees in economics and statistics, and thought I was going to become an economics professor. And then somebody gave me a job doing this analytics thing. And here I am today. So I worked for Deloitte out of college. I worked in a bunch of various roles at JP Morgan Chase in their analytics arm, focusing on data mining, BI, and corporate strategy. I spent some time at Amazon doing marketing analytics for Student Prime and Campus. If you don't know what Campus is, that's because it died. And I've spent the last 6 years at Zillow in a variety of roles. These days I support a team of about 80 folks who are data scientists and data visualization engineers. And we do something similar to what Steve described. We are the group at Zillow who ensures that strategy folks, product managers, executives make insight-based, rational decisions on a daily basis. So whether that's BI, that's science, that's causal inference, or something different altogether, that typically funnels through us, internally facing decision-making.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. So let's have our first preset question go. Haley, who's from the Grad Student Advisory Board.
Hi, I'm Haley. So I'm finishing my master's degree in business analytics and recently completed my 6-month internship as data analyst at Symetra Finance. So currently I'm looking for a full-time position, and I'm sure many fellow students here are in the same situation. So my question is, so if you have conducted interviews, what is one of your favorite questions to ask? It's for everyone.
I can start. So first of all, Haley, great job. You are doing analytics and you just finished your internship. And actually right after this panel, I have an interview. The question that I'm gonna ask the interview candidate is, the best one is you kind of ask open-ended questions. So my question is going to be, what kind of data analytic problem or customer pain points did you solve recently? What kind of analytics did you use to solve that problem and why? By asking this question, I'm not only trying to understand what that person did in order to understand the business problem, number one, which is key. Number two, I'm actually also understanding what kind of data analytics that person already has expertise in. And number three, why that person chose or decided to go with that model compared to the other model that exists. So by asking this blended open-ended question, I'm hoping I'll get detailed understanding of the different analytic model that that person is aware of.
I can jump in with another example. So I'll go more the case study route, right? So in my space, yes, we will ask folks technical questions about different either data viz or modeling techniques, but I really like this question that I'll never be able to ask any of you now around what we call best of Zillow. So imagine Uber, right? You rate your driver every time you get out of the car, and those drivers get star ratings that aggregate over time. Imagine Zillow doing the same thing. And I will tell someone the basics of the fact that we're going to do this rating thing, and we're going to have to classify every single real estate agent, irrespective of how many ratings they got, into one of 3 buckets: best of Zillow, just fine, terrible. And those things have different consequences associated with them. How do you go about classifying these folks into one of 3 buckets? And I'm intentionally giving you almost no information. It's an interesting question for us because you don't actually have to be, say, a Bayesian statistician to solve the problem. the way that we might want you to in the end. What we're looking for is, do you ask about the distribution of ratings? Do you ask about the distribution of the rating count? Do you ask to understand something about this variability over time, or if you have other data sources like verbatims from folks offering ratings themselves? And importantly for us, it's really easy to apply a rubric to a question like that has many possible solutions. And we believe really deeply in rubrics at Zillow to try to minimize bias in the recruiting and interviewing process. So if I ever see an SU candidate come in the door, I won't be asking that question though.
All right, so those are very good questions, problem solving. And so since I like to index, well, so in Amazon interviews, we have not panels, but we do have like 5 or 6 you're going to have throughout the day, and everyone's going to have their own techniques. Some of them are going to ask more open-ended questions, ask about what you've done in the past. But regardless of what I'm supposed to ask, I always ask about SQL because it is very critical for business analytics roles. And so what I really want to know is, how much do you know? And so we will ask, or I will ask more of a generic question, and then I will go deeper and deeper and deeper until you fall over and you say you don't know. So one of the things I like to ask about is about handling nulls. So how do they affect joins? How do they affect aggregate functions? Like really that detailed knowledge of what happens if I run this SQL. Here's some example tables. What are the results? Because in order to do the job, you have to know these sort of things. And so we'll ask practical questions of, can you do this? Do you know the intricacies of the language? How do they interact? What are the edge cases? And make sure that you think about the edge cases when you're answering all the questions. So that would be my advice to you, is if you ever are in front of me, expect me to dig into your SQL along with what I'm supposed to do, because that's just SQL's an added bonus. That so if you ever become one of my mentees, you will have lots of experience of me drilling you if you don't come with other questions you want to ask me. You can ask my past students.
I think it's perhaps my turn. It depends on the position. For data scientists, much like Chris, we might take a case-based approach. So, for example, one of the things that we used to do was have prospective candidates build a recommender system, and immediately they'd run into issues around too much data to be on their machine and stuff. And really, we're looking less for sort of a polished recommender and looking for how you deal with just sort of normal situations that come up. So too much data, or sometimes one of the questions that we'll ask for more kind of analyst-based roles is, how do you deal with a situation where you've got missing data, or perhaps you've got data from multiple sources, and some of these insights provide conflicting signals? How do you work through that? And so really just sort of looking for a pragmatic streak there. And then on the sort of less technical things, one of the things I like to ask folks is, tell me about something that you've learned recently. Could be technical, could be non-technical, could be to do with work or not. Really the motivation there is to know, or to get a feel for, is this someone that has a growth mindset? Are they someone that's constantly learning? I had somebody once tell me about cooking that they had gotten into, and they were really coming at it from a chemical point of view, and really thinking about how all these ingredients interact with each other. And it was a really fascinating conversation. But that's definitely one of the markers that I'm looking for, is this someone that can that just has an innate sort of growth mindset.
Great, thank you all. Those are some really, really good interview questions, and really makes me glad I am not pursuing a career in data analytics, because I would bomb every single one of those.
Same, Justin. I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. So
Justin and Megan, one thing to add, I mean, I'm going to piggyback on Jason's comment. As long as the candidate can show us growth mindset, you do not have to be an expert in all of those questions. You don't have to be an expert in your area. As long as you know what you know, and you can tell us what you don't know and be authentic about it yourself, you are in.
Yeah, this is so great. Thank you all for that insight. Super helpful.
Thank you.
So I would like to introduce one of our undergrad students who's on our, as Justin mentioned, we have two boards, a grad board and an undergrad board. This student is on our undergrad student advisory council, and they give us a lot of feedback and ideas to make sure our programming is relevant and helpful. So I'd like to introduce Nidhi, and Nidhi is a sophomore business analytics major, and she's got a great question for you all. Nidhi, go ahead if you want to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Like she said, my name is Nidhi, and I'm planning on double majoring in business analytics and marketing. So my question is, how do you see the business analytics field growing and changing in the next 10 years, especially since it's such a booming industry?
I can help us switch up the order here. So the term business analytics or data science or data analytics, they're all kind of loaded. So I'm going to talk about this from a Zillow context, which may lean a little bit more technical than sort of your average business analytics. But I think we're seeing something happen now that will likely accelerate in the next 10 years. And that is the amount of contributors to open source technology is making the techniques that a sort of general practitioner can use grow dramatically. So for instance, if you were working on time series modeling, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and you could work with ARIMA effectively, you're a pretty skilled time series modeler. And now it's almost easier for someone in my team who needs to build a forecast to use something like FB Profit, which is an open source package on both Python and R, open source by Facebook, that is much more complicated than ARIMA, that is essentially a machine learning algorithm packaged into a few lines of code. And that's one example, right? Post hoc causal inference. We're frequently doing something like difference in difference regressions to understand what happened downstream of a given event. And difference in difference regressions haven't gone anywhere. They used to be rather difficult to execute and tune. And now you have packages like Google's Causal Impact, also open sourced on both Python and R. And it creates a dilemma, right? All of a sudden, these really powerful techniques are kind of available to everybody with a line or two of code. And the challenge, I think, of the next 3, 5, 10 years, I don't know what it is how we balance expertise in some of this methodology with application of the methodology. Yeah, it's really easy for someone like me to say, everybody in analytics, start using these 20 different packages to solve your problems. Don't worry about learning them. Somebody else has done the work, but that's fraught with issues as well of misapplication.
Yeah, I'll mirror what Chris was saying. Is it's getting easier for people to do the hard stuff. Like if I go back 10 years, I was struggling just to get more than a day of data in order to do some analysis, and I had to jump through tons of hoops in order to like get enough data to make it meaningful for a significant period of time, or I had to highly aggregate it so that I could dump it into a MySQL reporting database and then run some non-optimal, well, I'll say non-optimal, but not the grain that I wanted to, that's going to propel me into the next level, the analysis. But now we can just easily query like years of data and we don't even think about it. So I like to say the analysts today they have it easy compared to what it was like a year ago. And as I was thinking about this question, it's funny, like Chris is saying the same thing, is before we had to rely on research scientists in order to do the really complicated things. And now it's an everyday expectation for business intelligence engineers or business analysts to do the same work. Like they're certainly not going to have the expertise as a research scientist because they're not getting PhDs in this anymore, but they can get the job done. They can do the analysis, they can make the recommendations, provide insights, and move the business forward. And I've seen this with the business intelligence engineer roles, the BIE roles, at Amazon is now the expectations are far higher than they were even 5 years ago. And so I suspect that's going to increase over the next 5 to 10 years. Is the obscure hard stuff that we expect the more specialized roles to do is going to roll into the everyday business analyst's role.
I'll say that shouldn't scare you, right? These things have become alarmingly easy in many ways.
Oh yeah, not meant to scare you. Like I even asked my current BIEs going, do you really expect these people like to do this at entry level? Like coming in for out of college? And they're like, yeah, this is easy. I'm like, all right. I have to adjust my expectations of what to expect out of business analysts to keep up with what the market and the world is actually moving on towards.
I'll say that my views are not entirely different from Chris and Steve's view. At the same time, I do not want to scare this group of people. So I'm gonna provide or look at this thing from a different angle. So my focus is gonna be on just letting you know that you can choose, you can decide to go and pick a particular level when it comes to business analytics and data science. There are different roles available at different level of expertise within Microsoft, and I'm sure it might be the case with Amazon, Zillow, and Nordstrom as well. It's like there are so many levels. There are pure business analysts, there are business architects, data scientists, professional, technical analysts, and based on which role do you want to apply to. If you want to go into business analyst starting role, you just need to have masters in a particular domain. You need to know how to apply R or Python, and you need to be comfortable with some machine learning algorithms. And to Steve's point, I'm not going to downplay SQL. Yes, SQL is definitely important. So SQL is the base foundation, and then you build different layers on top of it to apply it for the business analyst role. In order to be a data scientist at Microsoft, to Chris' point, you have to really know ins and out about all the available ML models. The more frequently, the ones that we are using are gradient boosting, decision trees, and neural networks, and deep learning. If you want to be a very expert data scientist working in a predictive and in a field where digital transformation is really being accelerated at a higher pace. Overall, if you look at the trend, per LinkedIn, there has been 350% increase in data science jobs since 2012. And if you look at this trend is going to go on and on. So you all have done a great job in terms of even signing up to do this master's or grad degree in analytics, because for you, options are going to be unlimited. It all boils down to, if you love doing programming, then pick data scientist as your core profession, or data engineer. If you like a mix of SQL, Excel, visualization tool, and you're good at presenting to leaders, then pick business analyst manager as your level. And if you want to be a leader later on, just like Jason, then you need to really look at the problem from a strategic perspective, 36,000 feet high. What are the problems that organization would like to solve? And how do I need to build my expertise to get there? Jason, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Nidhi, this is a good question. I think speaking from my spot at Nordstrom, I think one of the big changes that I've seen in my company, and I think is true in the industry as well, is the shift to, it's funny, I've got a board meeting coming up later this month, and I'm actually talking about one of these dynamics, which is this notion of moving from local optimal decisions to global optimal decisions. And said more simply, really it's this notion of enterprise thinking versus functional silo thinking. So I'll give you an example. You mentioned that you're studying business analytics and marketing. When I first started, with Nordstrom 8 years ago, most marketers were measuring the success of their program with return on ad spend. And then we got a little fancier and we got into, things like multi-touch attribution, trying to estimate the incrementality of marketing spend. Then we start talking about net sales return. Then we start talking about marginal net sales return. Now we're having conversations around, if I've only got $1 to spend, me being Nordstrom, should I spend it on more markdowns or should I spend it on marketing? Markdowns being, if the product's $100 and I discount it to 80. These are the kinds of sort of conversations I'm seeing in the business. Another example was last year, we partnered up with finance for fiscal year 2020 planning before COVID hit and all of that went out the window. But one of the questions from finance was, what are the drivers of conversion across the business, not just when the user's on the site, what's driving conversion, but it also got into things like, the effect of price mix, category mix, also things like shipping speed. And so then the executive team can make decisions around how much they want to invest in any one of those parts of the business. If I want things to get faster to the customer, I'm willing to spend this much because I think it has this sort of impact on conversion. So I would just say sort of the big change that I'm seeing in my company and I think in the industry is more connected end-to-end thinking. And I think for you personally, I think you make yourself that much more marketable the more context you have on the business. So not just being an expert in marketing, but understanding sort of the bigger picture.
Awesome. Thank you all. Next up, I would like to introduce Casey, who is a member of the Grad Student Advisory Board.
Hey, yeah, thanks for being here with us. I want to ask, what are the ethical implications of how business analytics is utilized in business? For instance, do privacy and data mining conflict? And how do professionals avoid bias when analyzing data?
I can maybe start here, and I'd love to hear from my fellow panelists as well. It's a really good question, and we run into it all the time. And I'll give you some examples. So, big picture, we have a very robust privacy department group that I work with very closely on a whole range of issues. Marketing is commonly sort of the area that we're most closely working with them when we get into conversations around data sharing and so on. So that's a very sort of active thing that we're working on all the time. It's not just, oh, we've run into an issue, let's call up privacy. It's something that we do all the time. And through that relationship, our privacy group is really active in industry. So for example, they're engaged in things like the Future of Privacy Forum, as an example. And last year, we started working on some new fraud algorithms. So there's a dynamic in retail where you ship a product to a customer and FedEx or UPS says it got delivered, but the customer calls up and says, I didn't get it. And sometimes it's real. Porch pirates are a real thing. But other times, these are fraudulent claims. People are calling up saying they didn't get it when they actually did. And so it's a pretty active area of fraud, and there's a fairly sort of active amount of work that we do to detect that. And you can very quickly run into issues around bias and ethics if you're not being careful when you go into that area. There's very sort of clear markers of fraud, one of which is simply location, where that order originated from. And so you want to be really thoughtful about what you're doing there when you start going down that space. So anyway, long story short, we actually engaged with academics from Yale and also George Washington University to have a conversation. Here's the problem space. How should we think about this? How can we guard against bias? How can we approach this thoughtfully? And so I don't know that there's a perfect answer. Working with them, we did come up with a set of guidelines that we do adhere to. But I think sort of having privacy at the table constantly is a key ingredient.
I think I can sort of draft off of that a bit, Jason. One of the direct questions here is, do privacy and data mining conflict? The short answer is yes, right? There's a tension between things like our consumer demand for personalized recommendations everywhere we go on the internet and consumer demand for privacy. These things run different directions. And so, many of us are racing to build the best personalization machines. And just because you can, create a unique ID, share it with a data broker, move that to Facebook, match it, link everything together with a tracking pixel, solve a user problem, doesn't mean you necessarily should, right? So specifically on the privacy side, I think everybody on this call on the professional side, I'm sure has had to do some work around CCPA and GDPR in the last few years. Those are California-wide and European regulations on privacy that were all, I'm sure, very difficult for us to implement. And I'm sure we are all very happy that someone set a standard to get us going. But on the business analytics side of the house, I think, the more data we have and the more complex modeling we have at our fingertips through, let's say, these open source packages, there's more chance for bias and errors, which I think gets to the second part of your question. So a couple of things we do at Zillow. One thing we do is before we engage in a lot of product building, we often use survey data, either external to us through a variety of publicly available sources, or our own internal population sciences group. And we spend an awful lot of money on a bunch of PhD population scientists who get their hands on every piece of survey data that we make any decision on, because it turns out survey data is hard, especially if it comes from like the American Housing Survey and the American Community Survey, which frequently conflict. The thing that we do for our internal modeling exercises is we've stood up ethics in AI and predictive modeling committee. It's early days, but anything that a data scientist or a research scientist or machine learning engineer or a business analyst is producing that has sort of consumer-facing implications, they can go to this ethics committee who can review their code, review their source data, and if it requires bringing in a population scientist or someone else, do so in a safe space where you're not going to be reprimanded for accidentally, pulling forward redlining data in the housing market or something, right? There's landmines all over.
Yeah, I'll say that it is very impactful, and I'm lucky that I haven't had to deal with it, because I don't do marketing, I don't do customer facing website stuff. So for me, it's easy because on the back end or for fulfillment, all of that, the unique customer information is already hidden from me. Like, companies have to think about the privacy aspects of their data sets and to make sure that they don't erode that customer trust. So at Amazon, all of our data sets are that we can access they don't have customer information in it. Like, I can't find you. Like, I can't look up anyone's orders here and violate the ethics around having all that data around you. But for me, I don't need that in order to do my business analytics work within like cost savings activities within the fulfillment systems, or tracking defects if you got your packages on time or not. So like, I don't have to struggle like Chris and Jason do in terms of not having this data do the marketing aspect, but I know it does exist out there. And so when we're actually building data sets, we do keep this in mind. Like, if we're consuming data sets from third-party vendors, or we're tracking the delivery drivers, what they're doing, we make sure that we don't associate like performance with the name, so anyone can't go in and see it. This is the privacy regulations that Chris was talking about. But I have heard stories of customer trust and brand erosion occurring because of data breaches or using personalization too far. And so it's always it should always be on our minds of when we have that detailed user information, are we doing, like, how would they think about it? Do they want this, or would they hate us if they knew what we were doing? So I would just make sure you think about the data you're using, and what would your customer know or think if they knew you were doing that?
Thank you, Steve. I'll fully agree with what three of you said. I would just say, even at Microsoft, we are following the same framework that you all are. Just for the student community, I just want to take a minute to help you. even though we are talking about privacy here, security and privacy, they go hand in hand. There is just a minute difference between the two. And you might have read in news that SolarWinds and how that kind of had a great impact and sort of ripple effect in the supplier chain industry. So privacy and security, they go hand in hand, because privacy comes into picture when we are talking about inappropriate use of data. So whoever on this panel work with data, if we are missing one step and we would inappropriately handle any data, then we are already getting into the preview of privacy. Security is protecting your data from unauthorized access. So when you are going to build dashboards, when you're going to create reports, if you're going to just share that link with anyone without understanding if that person needs to take a look at your data set or that report, then you are actually exposing yourself from security perspective. So we as data analysts, as business analysts, managers and leaders, we need to understand the difference between privacy and security to begin with. And then as Chris alluded to, that yes, there are CCPA, GDPR regulations. At the same time, every company, every startup needs to have their own privacy and security framework. So at Microsoft, we have come up with Ether Committee. So that lays the groundwork and foundation for AI principles and analytics principles. On top of it, each and every, let's say, model or the solution from engineering perspective that goes to the customers has to go through DSRE review, meaning internal digital security team has to review it. There needs to be a privacy review. They do a penetration testing, making sure that anyone who doesn't have access can't get into that solution. And on top of it, it's like whenever we are working with data set, doesn't matter how big or small the data set is, we often recommend it to people that they need to classify their data set. And when it comes to Microsoft, in addition to creating and betting on Azure Cloud and Azure Machine Learning, we are actually making it available through Office. So if you go and work in Excel or Word or any of the, let's say, the component of Office, there is a sensitivity button right at the top that says you can mark that content as classified, as secure, as highly confidential. So these are sort of classification tags that you can attach to make your data set, to make your product more private. So keep all of these in hand, because you can build great models, but if you would not bake privacy and security while building those models, you are actually going to be unethical.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That concludes the structured portion of our show today. So now I would love for students to, you guys can take over. Feel free to unmute yourself, ask our panelists some questions. You can utilize the chat if you want, really whatever works. So really now's your time to ask some questions there, students.
Hi, my name is Sam Sook. I'm a business analytics major, and I just was curious about just the everyday kind of like, I guess, itinerary of a data scientist or a business analyst. So do you come in to the office and how do you just start your day? Is it more so getting onto communications with other team members and other groups, or are you working on more so just heads down at your own desk?
So I can start. If you talk about the role of a data analyst or business analyst, they are the one people on my team who are working on applying and building those models on a day-to-day basis, applying it to customer problems. Let's say one of them is looking at identifying duplicate POEs, duplicate proof of execution images using machine learning, deep learning model. The other one is using predictive analytics to find out if there would be any frauds when it comes to journal entry testing. Another one is looking at our sales deals that we are having with the customers and identifying which one of the sales deals are at risk of becoming highly risky. So that's the work of a data analyst at a level that where they are going to build models on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to leaders like us, we are there to actually help our leadership understand how we need to think about business at an all-up level, what are some risks that we are thinking from enterprise level, and how our teams can build models to help them take the right decision for the company, whether it's investing in a particular market or expanding in the data centers, identifying different ways to kind of have more cash flow when it comes to before making an earning call, how can we make sure that we have the right cash flow, or whether it can be like just using machine learning to forecast better and reduce variance to budget. So it really depends upon what level are you talking about. At the end of the day, our goal is to help decision makers in taking the right decision for the company.
Thank you so much.
I actually have a question somewhat related to that. Hi, my name is Whitney. I'm a senior. I double major in management and analytics. I'm interested in the, I'm an extrovert, so I'm interested in the people side of data and working with people that don't understand data to help be that bridge. Does anyone have any suggestions on what path to look for and how to make sure that that's clear when I'm interviewing with people?
All right, I'll take a stab at this one. I like to say, and my go-to is business intelligence engineers, because they're the more, I'll call them hardcore business analytics, more technical scripting, maybe some data pipelining or data science. I call them the, like, I don't want to call them a generalist role, but they kind of are, with a mixture of data science, data engineering, project management, and business analytics. And even if it's not a BIE, even if it's a business analyst, you're really storytellers. And so what you're doing is you're trying to get insights out of the data to help answer business problems. Like, all of our goals is to, like, answer business problems, provide guidance to leadership so that they can make the right decision for the company. And to, like, deliver and or define what the strategic goals should be. So telling stories is like being kind of like, I'm not saying you have to be, everyone needs to be an extrovert, but if that's just naturally part of the job, is to work with others, figure out what the business problem is, define what, like, data you need, what analysis you need to do, and even better, write a white paper to say, here's the problem, here's the solutions, here's the analysis, here's why you should do X. And then you present that to leadership, and at the end of the day, you get a party and high fives, and we all get success. And so, like, when I talk about the roles with my mentees, I describe it as your storytellers. You're teasing out what the data is telling you, so that you can help guide the business in the right direction. I don't know if that helps or not.
Hi, Whitney. One of the things that I'm always trying to do is come up with these pithy ways to describe what I'd like the team to focus on. And one of the things that I think was brilliant, but they all just sort of raised their eyes at, is something I call the ABCs. And this is what I want my whole team to be thinking about. And some are more naturally inclined than others. So real quick, the A is for analytics everywhere. The B is for business outcomes, and then the C is closer to the customer. So let me explain what I mean by that. So the idea behind analytics everywhere is that your job is not done when you deliver that dashboard. Your job is to coach the business, to help them become practitioners, teach them to fish, and really help them sort of level up their own analytics game. So that's the A part, which is we want analytics to be everywhere. And in the case of Nordstrom, if the only model of engagement is that if the business has a question, they come to my team and we answer it, and then they go on their way, that model doesn't scale. That's not how a company becomes data-driven. They become data-driven through analytics everywhere. The B is, again, sort of all about business outcomes. You know, depending on whichever area you're part of, I want you coming in every day obsessing about that part of the business. So if you're in supply chain, I want you thinking about click to deliver. I want you thinking about the customer experience. If you're in marketing, I want you thinking about the outcomes that marketing cares about, customer acquisition, etc. So really being students of the business and having a high degree of empathy for your stakeholders. And then the last part, closer to the customer, is, you know, again, you know, sometimes in these support functions like analytics, for example, there's a distance between you and the customer. When I say customer, I mean the person that gives your company money. That's the customer. And so again, like really sort of invest in the time and really thinking about the customer and obsessing about the customer. That's sort of the stuff that we think about. So when you go for your job and you sort of talk about being an extrovert, maybe you can sort of frame it in a way that talks about the ABCs, because that would definitely resonate with me.
Thank you.
I think I love what you said, Jason, about being a student of the business. If we can kind of bring it back to some of the backgrounds of the folks on this call, Whitney, I suggest that what you really need and what you're looking for is breadth, right? In a lot of entry-level roles, that's not what's offered in these types of positions. You might work on a pretty narrow slice of the pie. And so I wouldn't be too holy about what that position is, right? You look at, I'll use mine because I remember it best, obviously, but I worked in production reporting and data mining and corporate strategy and marketing analytics and product analytics, and bounced around. And that type of experience was totally not intentional, but produced a certain amount of breadth that allows somebody in my shoes to play the role that I think you're describing.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
All right. Hi there. My name is John Carlo. I'm a first-year finance major, and I'm just sort of trying to go to every meeting, getting a feel for what people that are more advanced than me are looking at. I'm just wondering, what is the kind of positions for finance majors at your institution or just your industry? If you could just give me some ideas on that.
I can be super quick on this one. We've actually hired a bunch of people from finance, both internal transfers that were in the finance department, and then also folks external. Typically, they'll step into what we would call a data analyst role. So at Nordstrom, we have data scientists and data analysts, and typically their growth path starts with data analyst and whichever sort of level of seniority.
I think,
Thank you.
Giancarlo, so at Zillow, and I suspect at many others, our finance department is kind of two sides. One is the accounting side of finance, and the other is the financial planning and analysis side of finance. So imagine, building a business model in Excel that has hundreds of levers. Those levers are often the output of teams like mine. So we might forecast how many people are going to come visit Zillow.com. And the more equipped our financial planning and analysis folks are at understanding business analytics and modeling techniques, the better our partnership is. We've had folks move just like Jason described.
And I would add by saying that I'm a kind of person who actually started my career as a financial analyst after doing my MBA in finance and marketing. And then gradually for the last 8-10 years, I kind of pivoted on taking more of business engineer, business intelligence, and data analyst and data science roles to be here where I am today. So you can definitely pick that finance as a profession and build on to those skills.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. Is with my experience within Amazon, the FP&A org, they make sure that the business analysts are doing the right thing. So they'll create the models. They'll say, I'm going to launch this program that's going to save $10 million. And then one of the first things we ask is it finance approved? And that's when you go to your finance team and say, can you double check this and get your stamp of approval? And then you go back to leadership and says, yep, finance approved. So the financial analyst, it's almost the same role as, in my opinion, it's very similar role as a business analyst, except you have more like financial foundational knowledge. You understand all that jargon and terminology, and it's been so long since I've done my financial analysis, like what net present value and all these other considerations that go into those P&Ls. So I want to say there's like, I'm making up numbers, like 10 business teams for every finance analyst, like, because you're really just double checking, No, okay. I'm not oversimplifying this. I have great respect for our financial analysts and those partner teams. You're a partner with the business, but you scale up. So you will support like multiple organizations to make sure that they're thinking about the business right, making sure they do the financials right. So when they go in and propose their business or they claim savings, that they're actually doing the right thing.
I have a question kind of about like your educational path and your path throughout the company. A professor I had last year in the MSBA program mentioned, well, you don't really need a PhD anymore. Sometimes a master's is enough, right? So he says, depending on your degree and how you position yourself, it kind of dictates the path you might take throughout your career. Could you maybe just riff off that and your own experiences and paths a little more? I think that'd be really interesting.
All right, I'll start. I think it goes back to that specialization that I think Chris was talking about earlier, was if you're going to go deeper into research science or data science or have that scientist title, that's where some of the requirements of, at least in Amazon, the PhD comes in. Now, don't take this as truth. I forget the exact mapping between which degrees, what roles require it. But that more specialized roles where you actually have to know the finer grain nuances of optimization or forecasting models and like prove the depth and breadth of that field, where you go into that more refined roles. But for like for me, it was undergrad in electrical engineering, did programming for a while, got an MBA, and then went to Amazon, and then no further education past that, as far as I can remember. But that was my role. Like, I don't have a PhD in anything, but you do still learn like on the job. I mean, it really is a thing. So you won't stop learning. So all this learn and be curious questions that we talked about in the interview stuff, that continues to go. Like, you need to have that curiosity, that ambition, that desire to learn, because that's really how you're going to grow yourself in your career. And then really you can point yourself in any direction you want to go.
Emily, I think one of the things that that we're trying to be open to is people from diverse backgrounds. And I think that whereas in the past we might have held ourselves to traditional standards around education expectations, I think there's a realization that you know, if you want to have a diverse company and thus be representative of your customers, you have to be open to people from all walks of life, and that includes education. And I think there's a lot of different ways that you can accumulate skills that are relevant for the job, one of which is academia. Others might be trade schools to some extent. Others might be other on-the-job experiences that you've had. So we try not to hold ourselves to sort of rigid academic expectations in the way that we might have in the past.
I'll say +1 to Steve and Jason's comment. If you look at actually the profile that I have and a couple of other people on my team, we did not go to a data science school. We actually have either masters in information systems, masters in business administration, or just master in computer science. And from there, we build on by learning from continuing education courses. So personally, I have done over 30 courses online, from Johns Hopkins to MIT to UW, just learning about machine learning, AI, data science, ML, RPA, and then learning internally within each role in Microsoft has given me the role where I am today. So when I am recruiting for candidates, as Jason mentioned, I'm not looking for a data scientist for a data scientist role. I'm looking for applicable experience, because guess what? The question that one of the students asked before, how do you make sure that unconscious bias would not be baked in when you're building products? If you will keep hiring people like you, then there is definitely going to be a chance that the biasness is going to be there. So we can definitely build a diverse culture by bringing inclusivity to the hiring process. And that's what we are doing.
Yeah, Emily, I can close this out here. I have a bachelor's degree from a small state school in Ohio, and that is all. The stuff that Pooja was talking about, right? All of these training opportunities, we as employers all recognize that this stuff exists. and that it is often for some people a better path than formal education. I also have friends who were lawyers who got into machine learning for day trading's sake, and then they became machine learning engineers. They had the profit motive. I think it's a random walk with drift, but that's a different discussion altogether. So I'd say that, depending on the employer you're looking at, some are embracing maybe this 21st century modality more than others. If you look at probably the job postings of everybody on this call, and Zillow's inclusive, we will say we're looking for someone with, let's say, a 4-year technical degree in XYZ majors or equivalent experience. We're not filtering any longer on something like has PhD versus not.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. So I want to be cognizant of time and know that all of our panelists probably have other Zoom meetings or Microsoft Team meetings to go run to after this. So I just wanted to thank our panelists. Thank you, Chris, Steve, Jason, and Pooja. This was awesome and super valuable. I know business analytics is a massively growing field and there's a ton of opportunity. So thank you for coming today to talk to us a little bit more.